Good evening, everyone. My name's Suze Shardlow and I'm a software engineer. I'm going to talk to you about how I switched careers when I turned 40. So tonight I'm going to cover how I decided I wanted to be a coder, how I made the leap, and what I learnt along the way. I actually started coding about 35 years ago, long before I joined the police. So here's me on my 13th birthday, the greatest spotted home computing enthusiast there, almost camouflaged against the carpet. I had to learn from books because we didn't have the internet then. And also there was a program on BBC Two called the Computer Programme. And I've actually tweeted out a link to all the episodes in case you wanted to have a look. So it was really exciting growing up in the 1980s. We had films like War Games, this is still from War Games with Matthew Broderick. And even films like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which Matthew Broderick was also in. He hacked into the system to change his grades and his girlfriend's grades. And you could actually code at home. There's a lot of famous tech founders from that generation, people like Chad Hurley of YouTube, Sam Yagan of OkCupid were born within a couple of years of me. And the difference is that they kind of went the path of tech straight away, and I kind of went the long way around. This is the computer that I learned to program on. It's called a BBC microcomputer. It's a British invention created by Acorn Computers, and it was part of the BBC Computer Literacy Project, and it would accompany the TV show that I mentioned earlier. It's really easy. You just booted it up, typed in your code, and away you went. And you saved all your programs on a cassette disc. You could get a disk drive, but you had to plug it in, but most of us had cassettes. And you had to plug it into the TV. We only had one TV in the house, so you couldn't just code whenever you wanted to. You had to either book a time, or you just had to fight, basically, to get your time on the TV. We did have IT lessons at school, but the teachers kind of just looked at what they needed to teach us just before the lesson. They weren't really that interested in it, so they would come to me for help with the lessons. I went to a girls' school, and they didn't offer GCSE or A-level computing. My brother went to the boys' school, which was kind of twinned with a girls' school, and they did offer GCSE and A-level computing. But when I was 12, I won the school prize for IT, and this is a letter from the guy who donated the prize, which was a £10 book token. And with that £10 book token, I bought a French book and a German book, because I was just about to start learning foreign languages. And what I find really interesting now, looking back at that letter from October 1990, is the way he speaks about how languages are going to become more important in Europe. So thinking back to how it was then and now, it's quite interesting to see. So after a few years, the shift went from home tinkering with computers and coding them to being a user. So we still have the BBC Micro, but then we switched to a 386 PC. And when I switched that on, I thought, oh, I don't know how to program this. And that's kind of where I stopped doing the programming. This is me and my best friend Jenny. We're still best friends now. On our last day of sixth form, like you can see, we're really happy. We're 18, we're leaving school, and we're going to uni. But we didn't know what we wanted to do when we grew up. I never considered computing as a career. Hadn't done the GCSE, hadn't done the A-level. There just didn't seem to be a path, didn't occur to me. So I went and did a business degree and then went straight into working in marketing. And that was around the time when like Yahoo and Alta Vista and Ask Jeeves were kind of coming up, and people were getting dial-up modems at home, and people were starting to use the internet at home. So I taught myself HTML at university. So really I've got 23 years worth of web development experience. I worked my way up from marketing assistant to marketing executive, and then got a job as marketing manager at a small IT consultancy. And then in all my jobs, I proactively looked for opportunities to do web development, partly because I was interested in it, partly because nobody else understood it and they didn't really want to do it, so it kind of came down to me. So I was working at this little IT consultancy. They had a tech team. There was one woman on there and maybe about 12 to 15 men, and they'd all taken computer science degrees. And I looked at them and I thought, now how am I going to make that jump across the divide? I honestly do not know how to get into tech here. So then one day they told me, right, your job's going to be made redundant, and I was really upset. I was in my mid-20s, and this has never happened to me before. I just made my way up to marketing manager. I thought that my career path was mapped out, and then suddenly there was this spanner in the works. Didn't know what to do, and there was just this feeling of rejection and failure. So I brushed myself off and got a job at the Met Police. I worked in the IT department doing their marketing. So again, I thought, okay, great, I'm near tech now, I can make this jump. But I didn't see anybody that I aspired to be like. They, by their own admission, a lot of them weren't technical. So they had a lot of service, and what they'd done was they come in when they were young and then just stayed there, and then they just moved into these tech roles. And also in the Met Police, what they do is they manage the relationships between the Met Police and the outsourced providers. So they don't actually make stuff themselves. So there's nobody there that I could go up to and say, hey, how did you do this? But I did ask one woman who had about 20 years service how she got her senior tech role. And she replied to me that she used to work in the police station, and then one day they brought this computer into the police station, like one computer in the 1990s. And because she was the only person that could type, they said, right, you can be the computer person. And then, 10 years later, she's in this senior IT role. And I was like, right, okay, so I can't emulate that either. I'm really puzzled about how I do this. There's a lot of cuts in the police, as you may have heard about, a lot of government cuts, and that's affecting the police a lot. So my job was made redundant again. I came out of the marketing, went into a role where I was overseeing surveillance jobs and things like that. It's really interesting. And then got a job in logistics. But because I was a senior manager and because of all the cuts, I found myself having to constantly manage teams that were going through a lot of change. And the change was stuff that was really important to them. So it's things like where they were working, the hours they were working, and the tasks they were doing. And I was going through the similar changes myself, and it's really hard to try and bring people along on that change while you're going through it yourself. They're never going to be happy, and you know that as a senior manager, that's what your career is going to be like, because they're not going to pump loads of extra money into the police suddenly. So I knew that I needed to do something. So I thought, okay, what can I do? And then why did I choose to do coding? So I had to think long and hard about this. I knew that what I'd been doing before I was okay at, but it wasn't really me. So I thought long and hard about it, and I knew that I needed more options to kind of future-proof my career. And also knew that I couldn't figure out how to cross the divide. So I thought about, what did I enjoy doing when I was young? Looked at my hobbies. I really enjoy creating things and making things that people use and enjoy. I looked at what I enjoyed about my career so far, and creating efficiencies, communicating with people, and making tools. So I was always the one that would go into Excel and then make a little tool for people to calculate how much annual leave they had because they couldn't do it on a bit of paper, things like that. I went to meetups to kind of meet other people in the industry and try and get an idea of how I could do that journey. Went to hackathons, won my first hackathon even though I did not know how to code, and spoke to friends in the industry. So I've got quite a lot of friends in the industry, most of them are male. But then they went the route of, right, we did the A-level computing, we got the degree in computing, and then went up. So that was helpful and not helpful. So how did I learn? Well, like I said, I taught myself HTML when I was at university, did some online courses. I learned from books, and then I found out about coding bootcamps. So then I applied for a place on a coding bootcamp. I went back to the classroom. What I did was I didn't do a drastic change. I decided I was going to take a career break from the police, which meant that my job would still be open after the boot camp. So I just took some unpaid leave from the police, and then after the boot camp took some time out and then went back. And when I was on the boot camp, I found that I was with like-minded people. They all wanted to improve themselves. It was strange coming from the police because the environment that we were in, everyone just felt like there was no hope for them. But when we were on the boot camp, everyone was really excited. It was really intense. From day one, we were doing things that we'd never seen before. There was no more right-click, open in browser. I graduated from the boot camp with 3 full-stack JavaScript applications in my portfolio, which you can see on my website there, suze.dev. I was amongst the oldest there. And as you can see, there was probably like 5 or 6 women in the group, so 2-to-1, men to women. And the photo of us is on day 60 of 60, so that's the very last day of our boot camp. So I went back to the Met after that, and then they said to me, right, you're going to be made redundant. And this time I was really happy because I wanted to leave anyway, and I thought, right, so they're going to give me a bit of redundancy pay to leave. So I took the redundancy and then I left the Met after 12 years. So what am I doing now? Well, I decided I needed a break from work. I was also going through a bereavement, so that was even more a reason to take a break. So now I'm on a guilt-free career break. I'm researching roles in industries. I'm still going to meetups, I'm networking, I'm still hacking, going to the hackathons, volunteering. I'm organising meetups as well. I don't know how I had time to work in the first place. Doing my hobbies, practicing my skills at hackathons, and also on my website, which I've recently relaunched, and also started blogging. One of the things that I've done recently as well is I've been offered a job to teach children how to code, which sits really well because I've been in the Scouts for 5 years, so I've got a bit of experience with children, and it should help me to kind of solidify my knowledge, because I'm sure they're going to ask me loads of questions that I've never even thought of. So, finally, what did I learn along the way apart from how to code? Well, I learned that programming principles are basically the same as they were 35 years ago. So you've still got all like the loops and the variables and things like that. It's just the languages that are different and the machines that you're using that are different. Another thing that I learned is nothing was as scary as I thought it would be. I left the police after 12 years and nothing bad happened at all. Another thing that I learned was some people just don't understand it, and not everyone's going to encourage you, but don't let that put you off, because I think a lot of the time it says more about them than it does about you. I've also found out that the tech community, generally speaking, is quite open, welcoming and sharing, what I found from the meetups and the hackathons. Also, you don't need a degree, so when I met all those people at the beginning, a lot of them had degrees, or they'd just fallen into it in the police, and then I realised actually you don't need one, and because you don't need one, you can actually make that switch quite quickly. I've also realised I've got a lot of transferable skills from my 20-year career before I became a software engineer as well, which is coming very handy at the hackathons where I can't code. But it turns out I'm quite good at speaking to the client and getting from them all their requirements and what they really need and what they think they need, which is something I had to do in marketing all the time. And also learn that all coders Google stuff. It doesn't matter how experienced they are. They all have to Google it, and even the most experienced of them suffer from imposter syndrome. So that is my journey to programming via policing. Thank you very much for listening.